The great hall of Blackthorn Ridge was full of light and noise. Every year, the 9 packs gathered here to renew their bonds of peace, and every year, the same families sat in the same golden seats near the front. Illyra Voss was not one of those families. She sat near the back wall, where the shadows were thickest, wearing a plain gray dress with no jewelry and no title beside her name. She was an Omega, the lowest rank in her pack, and she had learned long ago that the best way to survive a room like this was to stay small and stay quiet. She had not wanted to come tonight, but every wolf in the 9 packs was required to attend the unity ceremony, and refusing was not something an Omega could do. So she stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the alphas greet each other with loud laughter and firm handshakes, watching the betas trade gossip behind painted fans, and waiting for the ceremony to end so she could go home to the small room she shared with 3 other Omegas. At the front of the hall stood Alpha King Draven Ashcroft. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself like a man who had never once doubted his place in the world. His pack, Blackthorn Ridge, was the strongest of the 9, and his word was closer to law than any other alphas. Golden light from the chandeliers caught the sharp lines of his face as he spoke with the other kings, his voice carrying easily across the room even when he wasn't trying to be heard. Illyra had seen him before, from a distance, the way everyone saw kings, as symbols, not as people. She never imagined she would have any reason to be noticed by him. She was content with that. Noticed people got hurt. Quiet people got to keep their peace. The ceremony began with the traditional blessing, spoken by the pack elders in the old language. Then came the part every wolf both feared and hoped for, the calling. It was said that on this night, when the moon was highest, the bond between true mates could reveal itself before the whole gathering. It happened rarely. Most wolves went their whole lives without a public calling, but when it did happen, it was considered a great honor, especially if it involved a king. The elder lifted his hands and began the chant. Illyra barely listened. She had heard this chant every year since she was old enough to attend, and nothing had ever happened to her. She expected nothing tonight either. But halfway through the chant, something changed. A warmth spread through her chest, gentle at first, then growing, until it felt like her heart was being pulled forward by an invisible thread. She gasped and pressed a hand to her chest. The pull grew stronger, tugging her forward, through the crowd, past wolves who turned to stare at her in confusion. She did not want to move. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, to stay small. But the pull was stronger than her will, and her feet carried her forward until she stood only a few steps from the front of the hall, close enough to see Draven's face clearly for the first time. His eyes had gone wide. He was staring at her the way a man stares at something he cannot believe is real. And Illyra understood, with a cold drop in her stomach, exactly what was happening. The whole hall understood it too. A murmur ran through the crowd, like wind through dry grass, growing louder and louder until it became open laughter. Illyra Voss, the quiet Omega no one had ever bothered to learn the name of, was mated to the Alpha King. This must be a mistake, someone said behind her, not bothering to lower their voice. The moon goddess wouldn't do this to him, said another. Draven said nothing at first. He simply looked at Illyra, as if trying to find some explanation, some reason this could not be true. She stood still under his gaze, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, refusing to let them shake. "Is this some kind of joke?" Draven finally said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the room easily. "I am the Alpha King of Blackthorn Ridge. My mate should stand beside thrones, not behind pack walls sweeping floors." More laughter followed, sharp and unkind. Illyra felt her face grow hot, but she kept her chin steady. She had endured worse than laughter before. She had endured being forgotten, being stepped over, being treated as though she did not exist at all. This was only another version of the same old wound. "I don't accept this bond," Draven said, turning to the elder who had led the chant. "There must be an error in the ritual." The elder looked troubled but shook his head. "The calling does not err, Alpha King. The bond has chosen." "Then the bond is wrong." Draven's eyes moved back to Illyra, cold now, distant. "Look at her. She has no rank, no family of note, nothing to offer a king's house. I refuse this mate." The words landed like physical blows, but Alira did not flinch outwardly. Inside, something old and tired simply nodded, as if it had expected this all along. Of course a king would not want her. No one ever wanted her for more than the work her hands could do. Why would tonight be any different? "I understand," she said quietly. Her voice was so soft that only those nearest to her could hear it. "I won't trouble you further, Alpha King." She turned to leave. The crowd parted for her, some out of pity, most simply eager to watch her walk away in shame. She kept her steps even, her shoulders straight, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her run. She had learned long ago that dignity was the one thing no one could take from her unless she gave it away herself. She was almost at the great doors when the braziers along the walls flared brighter, their flames turning from orange to a deep, silver white. The crowd gasped and stepped back. Alira stopped, confused, and looked down to find that the stone floor beneath her feet had begun to glow with a pattern she had never seen before. An intricate design of moons and stars, ancient and beautiful, spreading outward from where she stood. "What is that?" someone whispered. The elder who had led the chant fell to his knees, his face pale with shock. "The Lunaheart sigil," he breathed. "It cannot be. That bloodline has been gone for 500 years. A wind moved through the hall, though every window was shut. The silver light grew brighter, wrapping around Alira like a cloak of moonlight, and when she tried to speak, to ask what was happening, a voice came from her lips that was not entirely her own. It was layered, ancient, echoing with the weight of centuries. "I am the moon goddess," the voice said, "and I have watched this daughter of my first blessed line be cast aside and forgotten by those who owe their crowns to her ancestors." Every wolf in the hall dropped to their knees, including the other 8 Alpha Kings. Draven remained standing for a moment longer than the rest, frozen in disbelief, before his legs seemed to give way beneath him, and he too knelt. "The Lunaheart line was the first line I blessed," the voice continued, "before any of your 9 packs existed, before any crown was forged. They protected the old forests when the world was young. When darkness came for them, they gave everything to shield the packs who came after. And I hid their last daughter among the Omegas, safe from those who might use her blood for power. She was never meant to be forgotten. She was meant to be protected." The silver light softened, and slowly, Alira felt control return to her own voice, her own body. The room was utterly silent now, hundreds of wolves kneeling before her, staring up with expressions she had never once seen directed at her: awe, reverence, and in some faces, fear. She looked at her hands, half expecting them to look different somehow, though they were the same hands that had scrubbed floors and carried firewood for the pack that had never valued her. But something inside her did feel different. For the first time in her life, she understood that her quietness had never been weakness. It had been survival, patience, and, without her even knowing it, protection of something far greater than herself. Draven lifted his head slowly. His face, usually so certain and commanding, was open now, stripped of pride. "Alira," he said, and it was the first time he had ever used her name. "I did not know." "No," she agreed. "You didn't. You didn't ask either." The words were gentle, but they carried the weight of every year she had spent unseen. Draven flinched as if struck. Around them, the other alphas began to rise, murmuring apologies of their own, though none of them had spoken to her directly before tonight either. She had simply never mattered enough to notice, until the ground itself had forced them to. "I humiliated you in front of everyone," Draven said. "I said things I can never take back." "No," Alira said again, quietly but firmly. "You can't. But you can decide what you do, now that you know better." She did not ask him to grovel. She did not demand a public punishment, or use her newfound standing to humiliate him the way he had humiliated her. That was not who she was, even now, even with an ancient bloodline suddenly resting on her shoulders. But she also did not rush to forgive him, did not smile, and tell him it was all right, because it was not all right, and pretending otherwise would only teach him that cruelty carried no true cost. "I would ask," Draven said carefully, "for the chance to know you, not because the bond demands it, and not because of your bloodline, because I was wrong about you. and I would like the opportunity to be right, if you'll allow it. Illyra studied him for a long moment. The hall waited in silence, elders and kings alike, watching the quiet Omega, who had just been revealed as something greater than any of them. You may have the chance, she said finally, but it will be earned slowly, Alpha King, not given because the goddess spoke my name aloud. Draven nodded, and for the first time, there was no pride in his expression, only quiet respect. Slowly then, the elder who had first recognized the sigil rose unsteadily to his feet and bowed low before Illyra. Forgive us, Lunaheart daughter. We did not know we had failed to honor you. Illyra looked around the hall at the faces that had laughed at her only minutes before, now bowed in respect they had never once offered her, when she was simply an overlooked Omega, with no name worth remembering. She felt no desire for revenge, no wish to make them suffer as she had. She only felt tired, and beneath that tiredness, something new beginning to grow. A quiet strength that did not need anyone's permission to exist. Rise, she said simply, all of you. I did not come here tonight seeking thrones or bows. I came because I was required to, same as every year before this one. Nothing about who I am has changed tonight. Only what you know of it has. It was a small thing to say, but it settled over the hall like a lesson none of them would soon forget. Rank and bloodline had never made her worth less or more. She had always been herself, patient and steady, whether anyone noticed or not. As the ceremony slowly resumed around her, murmurs replacing the earlier laughter, Illyra walked toward the great doors once more, this time on her own terms rather than in retreat. She did not look back to see if Draven watched her go, though she suspected he did. She stepped out into the cool night air, where the moon hung full and bright above Blackthorn Ridge, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself breathe freely under its light. Behind her, the king who had once mocked her stood among his kneeling court, finally understanding that the quietest person in the room had been carrying something far heavier and far more precious than any crown he had ever worn.